Welcome to MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic. Today we are going to review Kamigawa Neon Dynasty for any potential replacements to the 99 for any EDH decks residing in the BCC. Oh, but that's not all. We will also take a look at some cards that could impact the Commander format. In order for a card to be included into a deck in the Burgeoning Commander Catalog, one or more of the following criteria must be met. Number 1. Is the card a better version of one already in the 99? The new card should be an improvement over the replaced card in some measurable aspect other than it's new. A new card should replace a card of similar mana value and ability. For the purposes of redundancy, if a new card is added to the deck without replacing a card of similar function, then there must be enough justification to do so due to potentially weakening another area of the deck. We can't add a card just because. Number 2. Does the card strengthen any of the deck's themes? Decks in the BCC operate under carefully laid out themes and schematics. Any introduction of new cards must either maintain these themes or enhance them in some way. It will be difficult to justify including a new card into a build that does nothing to support the pre-existing themes of a deck. Number 3. If a card is not a better version of one already in the 99 and does not strengthen any of the deck's themes, then why is the card being considered? It's not impossible to find a slot for any card in any deck. If a card serves no other purpose than just being new and different to a build, then it is unlikely to enhance thematic synergies or strengthen win conditions in that same deck. These are important factors to recognize. Just because we can add a new card to a deck doesn't mean we should. The challenge will be to protect every build from becoming homogenized due to the frequent influx of new cards entering the format. It is reasonable, from a deck building standpoint, to slightly weaken an area of strength for the purposes of including an outside-the-box card, but it has to make sense to the overall vision of the build. With these caveats in mind, let's talk about the new cards from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty and discuss any potential additions that can be made to the 99 of the decks in the Burgeoning Commander Catalog. You can look in the description below for links to the deck lists and deck text for each of these builds. The BCC has grown since our last set review, and we're ready to assess any possible new additions to its contents. We've got a lot of work to do, so let's get to it. Ramping out big and powerful creatures is the theme of this build, and there are two cards that caught my attention with respect to this Xenagos God of Revels deck. Myojin of Towering Might is an 8/8 spirit for 5 and 3 green mana. If we cast it from our hand, then it enters the battlefield with an indestructible counter on it. We can remove an indestructible counter from Myojin of Towering Might and distribute 8 +1/+1 counters among creatures we control. They gain trample until end of turn. Let's focus on the text of this card. It says, distribute 8 +1/+1 counters among creatures we control. It does not say, distribute 8 +1/+1 counters among other creatures we control. We can remove the indestructible counter and put all 8 +1/+1 counters on Myojin of Towering Might. In conjunction with Xenagos God of Revels' combat trigger, we could send a 32/32 hasty trampler into combat. Sweet! However, there are some drawbacks. First, Myojin of Towering Might must be cast in order to get an indestructible counter. It's not impossible to cast Towering Might in the Xenagos God of Revels deck, but with so many ways to cheat it into play, it may feel bad holding it in our hand waiting for the necessary mana to become available to ensure that it enters with an indestructible counter. A 32/32 attacker with trample is so much better than a 16/16. Which brings up drawback number 2. If we cast it from our hand and get the indestructible counter, the trample effect only lasts until end of turn. Although there are evasion-granting spells and effects in the 99 of this Xenagos deck, there are only a handful of creatures that do not have evasion. The inclusion of these evasionless creatures is rationalized by what utility they offer to the build, like Etali Primal Storm, Archetype of Endurance, and Hydra Omnivore. Is Myojin of Towering Might on the same scale as these creatures? I don't believe so. In a deck that is dedicated to sending one-shot creatures into combat quickly, Myojin of Towering Might's one-and-done evasion-granting effect, in addition to its need to be cast in order to activate its effect, are just too restrictive to warrant its inclusion into the 99 of this deck. There isn't one creature in the current deck list that I would replace with Towering Might. Pass. Invigorating Hot Spring is an enchantment for 1 red and a green mana. It enters the battlefield with 4 +1/+1 counters on it and gives modified creatures we control haste. For a creature to be modified, it must be enchanted, equipped, or have a counter on it. We can remove a +1/+1 counter from this enchantment and put it on target creature we control, but only as a sorcery and only once per turn. In the current 99 of this deck, there are no auras and only one equipment, which is Embercleave, and only the Great Henge can put +1/+1 counters on our creatures. Although we can remove a +1/+1 counter from Invigorating Hot Spring to modify one of our creatures, thereby granting it haste for a turn, Rhythm of the Wild, which already is a part of the 99, allows us to choose whether or not to put a +1/+1 counter on a non-token creature or give it haste whenever it enters the battlefield. As a bonus, creature spells we cast can't be countered. Eventually, the +1/+1 counters run out on Invigorating Hot Spring, and we're left with an enchantment that only triggers through creature modification. This card is not an improvement over Rhythm of the Wild. Pass. Any new vampire creatures will trigger a review of our Edgar Markov deck. However, there are no vampire creatures in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. Nothing to add here. Any new zombie creatures will trigger a review of our Wilhelt the Rotcleaver deck. However, there are no zombie creatures in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. Nothing to add here. Any card that has a WUBRG mana value or a WUBRG activated ability triggers a review of our Morphin the Boundless WUBRG tribal deck. There are 3 cards to review. Kyodai, Soul of Kamigawa, is a 3/3 legendary dragon spirit with flash and flying for 3 and a white mana. When it enters the battlefield, another target permanent we control gains indestructible for as long as we control Kyodai. We can pay WUBRG to give Kyodai +5/+5 until end of turn. Instant speed protection via indestructibility for another permanent we control on a 3/3 body with evasion is very favorable. The WUBRG activated temporary power and toughness boost is also powerful, particularly in a deck specifically built for WUBRG spells and activations. All of these factors make Kyodai a must-add to the 99 of this deck. What to replace? Perhaps Bringer of the Red Dawn, General Tazri, Niv Mizzet Reborn. The MTG will be tasked with identifying a card to be replaced by Kyodai. The Kami War is a saga for 1 and WUBRG colors. When we put the first lore counter on it, we exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls. The second lore counter allows us to return up to 1 other target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and then each opponent discards a card. With the final lore counter, we exile the Kami War, and it returns to the battlefield transformed as Okagachi Made Manifest, a 6/6 dragon spirit with flying and trample. It's all colors, and also is an enchantment creature. Whenever Okagachi Made Manifest attacks, defending player chooses a non-land card in our graveyard. We return that card to our hand, and Okagachi gets +X+0 until end of turn, where X is the mana value of that card. Exile removal, bounce disruption, card advantage through opponent discard, a massive, evasive, and pumpable threat, and card recursion. This is all from one card? The Kamigawa is a shoo-in for this WUBRG tribal deck, easily replacing a spell like Utter End. We lose instant speed exile removal for a CMC of 4, but gain sorcery speed exile removal, bounce, mass discard, and a 6/6 flying and pumpable trampler with built-in card recursion stapled to its attack trigger. I think we'll accept that trade every day of the week and twice on Friday Night Magic. Goshintai of Life's Origin is a 3/4 enchantment shrine creature for 3 and 1 green mana. We can pay WUBRG and tap it to return target enchantment card from our graveyard to the battlefield. Whenever Goshintai of Life's Origin or another non-token shrine enters the battlefield under our control, we create a 1/1 colorless shrine enchantment creature token. This card has a WUBRG ability, and since this is a WUBRG specific deck, we have to evaluate it. In the current 99 of this build, there are 6 enchantments, 1 enchantment creature, and the Prismatic Bridge, which can't enter the battlefield from our graveyard through Goshintai's ability. There is not enough of an enchantment presence in this deck to reconcile this card's inclusion. Practicality trumps flavor in this instance. Pass. We are always looking to improve upon the forces from above and below in order for Kalia of the Vast to have her revenge. Sadly, there are no angel creatures in Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. We do have a demon to discuss, and 3 dragons. Hidetsugu Devouring Chaos is a 4/4 legendary ogre demon for 3 and 1 black mana. We can pay a black mana and sacrifice a creature in order to scry 2. We can pay 2 and 1 red mana, tap Hidetsugu, and exile the top card of our library. We may play that card this turn. When we exile a non-card this way, Hidetsugu deals damage equal to the exile card's mana value to any target. This is one of my favorite new commanders from the set. However, how would it function in the 99 of this Kalia of the Vast deck? Let's take a closer look. This build is constructed for the purposes of getting big, evasive, and powerful creatures into play with Kalia of the Vast's attack trigger, or through a multitude of other cheat-into-play spells and effects. Hidetsugu is only a 4/4 with no evasion. All but 1 creature in the current 99 of this build has evasion. These combat stats do not measure up with the other creatures in our deck. Let's continue. We must sacrifice a creature in order to scry 2. With only 1 creature with a converted mana cost of less than 5 in the deck, for investment purposes, we would prefer to keep our powerful creatures on the battlefield. Hidetsugu's exile ability can be effective. We invest 3 mana to activate it, we play the card this turn, and it will deal direct damage to any target. However, the cost of our average spells in this deck is 4.58 mana, meaning we would need another handful of mana to cast the exile card, most likely during our turn, which is an unlikely scenario. There also is a 40% chance that this effect whiffs, and we deal 0 damage because we exiled a land card. On the other hand, investing just 3 mana to activate Hidetsugu's ability and ping something for upwards to 9 damage is quite alluring. This is how we reach the final decision in evaluating Hidetsugu. There are many pieces to a recursive engine embedded in this build. Our overpowered and evasive creatures are easily recycled from our graveyard back to our hand in order to cheat back into play or directly put back onto the battlefield. The sturdy staying power and recursive synergy of our creatures are much more reliable than what Hidetsugu offers to this type of build. The forces from above and below drive this deck. particularly with their enter the battlefield or death triggers, not to mention their proficiency in combat. There are a lot of deck lists that Hidetsugu can fit into, but it's just not this one. The card's function does not fit the theme of this deck, and it would see more success in a different build. Pass. Ao the Dawn Sky is a 5/4 legendary dragon spirit with flying and vigilance for 3 and 2 white mana. When it dies, we choose one of the following modes. Either we look at the top 7 cards of our library and put any number of non-land permanents with a total mana value of 4 or less from among them onto the battlefield, or we put 2 +1/+1 counters on each permanent we control that's either a creature or a vehicle. AO is just a 5/4 with no enter the battlefield triggers or combat damage triggers. Its first death trigger does not align well with this deck, as there are exactly 15 non-land permanents with converted mana costs of 4 or less. It seems fairly reasonable that AO's first death trigger could completely whiff. AO's second death trigger is not helpful enough to rationalize its inclusion in this deck. We don't play with vehicles and generally do not have a large number of creatures on the battlefield to buff with +1/+1 counters. The creatures in this deck do not need buffing. This Kalia deck is not the right build for AO. Pass. Junji, the Midnight Sky, is a 5/5 legendary dragon spirit with flying and menace for 3 and 2 black mana. When it dies, we choose one of the following modes. Either each opponent discards 2 cards and loses 2 life, or we put target non-dragon creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control and we lose 2 life. The 1/6 death trigger can be game-changing. Also, the non-dragon creature card restriction on Junji's second death trigger is not a deal-breaker, as just 1/3 of the creatures in this deck are dragons. Junji's death triggers pair favorably with the recursive engine present in the deck. These effects can put Junji back into our hand or the battlefield through our various cheat-into-play effects. Junji is a definite inclusion into the 99 of this Kalia build. Candidates for replacement include Hellkite Tyrant and Thunder Dragon. Let me know in the comment section below which creature you would replace to make room for Junji the Midnight Sky. Atsushi the Blazing Sky is a 4/4 legendary dragon spirit with flying and trample for 2 and 2 red mana. When it dies, we choose one of the following modes. Either we exile the top 2 cards of our library, and until the end of our next turn, we can play those cards. Or we can create 3 treasure tokens. We do not want to exile cards from the top of our library for fear of losing valuable game-ending creatures. The entire theme of the deck is cheating powerful and evasive creatures into play, not hard-casting them from exile. Powerful and evasive creatures generally are mana-intensive, hence our desire to cheat them into play. Upon Atsushi's death trigger, imagine if we exiled Gisela, Blade of Gold Knight, or Razaketh the Foul-Blooded, then they could be lost for the game. That would hurt. A lot. Atsushi's other death trigger does not sweeten the deal enough. This is not the right build for Atsushi. Pass. We want to assess any cards that focus on keyword abilities or are keyword-centric in order to strengthen Cathril Aspect Warper. There are 2 cards to consider for inclusion. Eater of Virtue is a legendary equipment that costs 1 to cast and 1 to equip. Whenever equipped creature dies, we exile it, and equipped creature also gets +2/+0. As long as a card exiled with Eater of Virtue has flying, equipped creature has flying. The same is true for First Strike, Double Strike, Death Touch, Haste, Hexproof, Indestructible, Lifelink, Menace, Protection, Reach, Trample, and Vigilance. That's 12 different keywords. 12! Do you know who loves keyword abilities? Cathril Aspect Warper. These two cards share 10 of the 12 abilities listed on Eater of Virtue. Imagine if Cathril has a slew of keyword counters on it and is equipped by Eater of Virtue. Cathril dies and is exiled. Eater of Virtue retains all of those keyword abilities upon Cathril's exile, and as a bonus, Cathril returns to the command zone. We're left with what may be the most powerful equipment in Magic's history. Automatic inclusion. Eater of Virtue easily slots into the 99 of this deck, replacing Gifted Aetherborn. We sacrifice a 2-drop with 2 keyword abilities for double black mana for an equipment that can have upwards to 12 total keyword abilities for a CMC of 1 and an equip cost of 1. Cathril players should be very excited about this new equipment. Junji, the Midnight Sky, is a 5/5 legendary dragon spirit with flying and menace for 3 and 2 black mana. When it dies, we choose one of the following modes. Either each opponent discards 2 cards and loses 2 life, or we put target non-dragon creature from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control and we lose 2 life. Let's dissect each death trigger. Junji dies and each opponent discards 2 cards and loses 2 life. That's card advantage in the form of a 1-for-6 trade-off. Those are great numbers. Junji dies, and we return target non-dragon creature from any graveyard to the battlefield under our control. Not just from our graveyard, not just from an opponent's graveyard, any graveyard. As a bonus, Junji has 2 great evasive keyword abilities in Flying and Menace. Cathril just got a new BFF. This creature is too good not to include in the 99 of this build. Junji, the Midnight Sky, will replace Ramunap Hydra. We add an additional mana to the CMC and lose a keyword ability, but the overall strength of the deck becomes enhanced by this swap. We are exchanging Vigilance, Reach, and Trample with a CMC of 3 and a green mana for Flying, Menace, and either 1-for-6 card advantage or creature recursion from any graveyard upon death for the investment of 3 and 2 black mana. The numbers are too good to pass up. Junji is in, Ramunap Hydra is out. Since Golos Tireless Pilgrim has been banned in EDH, this deck has been disassembled. However, it remains a part of the Burgeoning Commander Catalog for the purposes of showcasing the 99 to any players whose playgroups or LGSs would still allow Golos. Mine, unfortunately, do not, which is the reason for this deck's Thanos-like dusting. How many of the 10 dragon or dragon-centric cards in this review will be worthy of inclusion into our Scion of the Ur-Dragon deck? Let's find out. Ao, the Dawn Sky, is a 5/4 legendary dragon spirit with flying and vigilance for 3 and 2 white mana. When it dies, we choose one of the following modes. Either we look at the top 7 cards of our library and put any number of non-land permanents with a total mana of 4 or less from among them onto the battlefield, or we put 2+1/+1 counters on each permanent we control that's either a creature or a vehicle. With so many powerful dragons in the 99 of this deck, I do not foresee many scenarios during which I would activate Scion's ability to become a copy of AO until end of turn. AO also does not fit the mass recursion game-ending blowout of which this deck is capable. There are exactly 12 non-land permanents with converted mana costs of 4 or less in the deck, and it seems fairly reasonable that AO's first death trigger would completely whiff. Its second death trigger is not helpful enough to rationalize its inclusion in this deck. We don't play with vehicles and generally do not have a large number of creatures on the battlefield to buff with +1/+1 counters. Plus, they're dragons. They don't need buffing. This Scion deck is not the right build for AO. Pass. Kyrie the Swirling Sky is a 6/6 legendary dragon spirit with flying and ward 3 for 4 and 2 blue mana. When it dies, we choose one of the following modes. Either we return any number of non-land permanents with total mana value 6 or less to their owner's hands, or we mill 6 cards and then return up to 2 instant and or sorcery spells from our graveyard to our hand. There is some great value in each of Kyrie's death triggers. We can maximize the effectiveness of Kyrie's first death trigger by choosing all of our opponent's tokens and some combination of troublesome and or problematic non-land permanents to bounce. In a pinch, we could activate Scion to become a copy of Kyrie in response to a destroy creature spell, and then return Scion to our hand upon its death, saving it a trip to the command zone and an uptick of commander tax. Kyrie's second death trigger could be beneficial, as there currently are 23 instant and sorcery spells in the deck. It seems reasonable to believe that we could return 2 spells from our graveyard to our hand. Plus, the built-in mini-mill effect enhances the game-ending graveyard mass recursion package, which is one of the win conditions of the deck. I'm lining up Kyrie against Silumgar Drifting Death. Silumgar's presence in the 99 is solely to protect Scion with its hexproof ability, which will fizzle any spell targeting Scion. Kyrie doesn't do it as well. Kyrie can't protect Scion better than Silumgar. Unfortunately, this is a tough pass. Junji the Midnight Sky is a 5/5 legendary dragon spirit with flying and menace for 3 and 2 black mana. When it dies, we choose one of the following modes. Either each opponent discards 2 cards and loses 2 life, or we put target non-dragon creature card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under our control, and we lose 2 life. If not for the non-dragon creature card restriction, Junji would be a slam dunk addition to this deck. The 1/6 death trigger is enticing, but there are very few scenarios I can envision during which I would activate Scion to become a copy of Junji. Plus, Junji does not enhance the game-ending mass recursion synergy present in the deck. Pass. Atsushi the Blazing Sky is a 4/4 legendary dragon spirit with flying and trample for 2 and 2 red mana. When it dies, we choose one of the following modes. Either we exile the top 2 cards of our library, and until the end of our next turn, we can play those cards, or we create 3 treasure tokens. We do not want to exile cards from the top of our library for fear of losing a valuable dragon which can be used as a one-shot, or for our game-ending mass recursion synergy. I don't envision any scenario during which I would activate Scion's ability to become a copy of Atsushi, even with 3 treasure tokens at stake. If my commander is going to die, then I want to activate Scion's ability for punishable effects, like through the use of Yosai the Morning Star, or Kakusho the Evening Star. This is not the deck for Atsushi. Pass. Kura the Boundless Sky is a 4/4 legendary dragon spirit with flying and death touch for 3 and 2 green mana. When it dies, we choose one of the following modes. Either we search our library for up to 3 land cards and put them into our hand, or we create an XX green spirit creature token, where X is equal to the number of lands we control. If the lands entered the battlefield instead of being put into our hand, then Kura would be a serious consideration for the 99. However, it's only a 4/4 with flying and death touch for 5 mana, and its death triggers result in either a land drop for 3 future turns or an evasionless creature token. These are unimpressive stats for our Scion deck. Pass. The Kami War is a saga for 1 in WUBERG colors. Its first lure counter exiles target non-land permanent an opponent controls. Its second lure counter returns up to one other target non-land permanent to its owner's hand, and then each opponent discards a card. Its third lure counter triggers an exile effect, and we return it to the battlefield transformed into Okagachi Made Manifest, a 6/6 dragon spirit with flying and trample that is all colors. Whenever Okagachi attacks, defending player chooses a non-land card in our graveyard. We return that card to our hand, and Okagachi gets +X/+0 until end of turn, where X is the mana value of that card. In essence, we're evaluating two cards here. For an investment of 6 mana and 2 turns, we exile a non-land permanent, bounce a non-land permanent, and force each opponent to discard a card. In a 4-player game, that's a 1 for 5. On turn 3, we get a 6/6 dragon with flying and trample that triggers card recursion and a temporary power boost each time it attacks. More advantages. However, there is a massive caveat we must consider. What if we don't want the card in our hand? What if the defending player is savvy enough to reconcile that taking additional combat damage is more acceptable than the game-ending mass recursion synergy we've been building throughout the game by putting a key piece of it into our hand? That's what it boils down to in this evaluation. The card itself is great, but hurts the thematic schemes present in this deck. Pass. Kyodai, Soul of Kamigawa, is a 3/3 legendary dragon spirit with flash and flying for 3 and a white mana. When Kyodai enters the battlefield, another target permanent we control gains indestructible for as long as we control Kyodai. We may pay WUBRG to give Kyodai +5/+5 until end of turn. Kyodai could be used to protect Scion, but 4 is a hefty price tag to protect one permanent. On the plus side, in a 5-color deck, it is much easier to pay WUBRG for +5/+5 than it is to pay 5 red mana for +5/+0 for Dragon Tyrant as a path to lethal commander damage through an activation by Scion. Alas, Kyodai does not do enough to warrant inclusion into this build and is not better than any of the dragons already in the 99. Pass. The Dragon Kami Reborn is a saga for 2 and 1 green mana. Its first and second lore counters allow us to gain 2 life and look at the top 3 cards of our library, exiling one of them face down with a hatchling counter on it, and putting the rest of the cards on the bottom of our library in any order. Its third lore counter triggers an exile effect, and we return it to the battlefield transformed into Dragon Kami's Egg, a 0/1 egg creature that says whenever Dragon Kami's Egg or another dragon creature we control dies, we may cast a spell from among cards we own in exile with hatchling counters on them without paying its mana cost. 1/4 of this deck is dragons. There is no guarantee that we would be able to exile a creature card from either of the first 2 lore counter activations. Also, we really don't want to cast our dragons. We want them either in the library for Scion or in the graveyard for our game-ending mass recursion spell. Pass. Jugen Defends the Temple is a saga for 2 and 1 green mana. Its first lore counter creates a 1/1 green human monk creature token with tap to add a green mana to your mana pool. Its second lore counter puts a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. Its third lore counter is an exile effect, and we return it to the battlefield transformed into Remnant of the Rising Star, a 2/2 dragon spirit with flying. Whenever another creature enters the battlefield under our control, we may pay X and put X +1/+1 counters on that creature. As long as we control 5 or more modified creatures, Remnant of the Rising Star gets +5/+5 and trample. The abilities of this saga do not mesh with the theme of this build. The mana ramp isn't immediate, the +1/+1 counters are restrictive, and the payoff of having a 7/7 dragon with flying and trample for 2 and a green mana in this build is inordinately difficult because we need 5 modified creatures. Pass. Goro Goro, Disciple of Ryusei, is a 2/2 Goblin Samurai for 1 and a red mana. We can pay a red mana and give creatures we control haste. We also can pay 3 and 2 red mana and create a 5/5 red Dragon Spirit creature token with flying, but we can only activate this ability if we control an attacking modified creature. The haste is nice, but not better than any of the other haste enablers already present in the deck, and the dragon token ability is too restrictive for this build. Pass. With each new set, there will be challengers to already established tribal representatives in the Changeling pool of our Morphin the Boundless Shapeshifter deck. The following cards have abilities specific to ninjas and rogues. These cards will attempt to usurp Yuriko the Tiger Shadow as the ninja tribe representative in the Changeling pool, and Zareth San the Trickster as the rogue representative in the Changeling pool. Are any of these cards better than the current incumbents? Let's find out. Prosperous Thief is a 3/2 human ninja for 2 and 1 blue mana. It has Ninjutsu 1 blue, which allows us to return an unblocked attacker to our hand and then put this card onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Whenever one or more ninja or rogue creatures we control deal combat damage to a player, we create a treasure token. If Prosperous Thief's ability created a treasure token for each ninja or rogue dealing combat damage to a player, then it would instantly replace Zareth San the Trickster as the rogue representative in the Changeling pool. Without this change, however, Prosperous Thief does not impact the battlefield as much as Zareth San or Yuriko the Tiger Shadow. Pass. Silver Fur Master is a 2/2 rat ninja for 1 blue and 1 black mana. It has ninjutsu for 1 blue and 1 black mana as well, which allows us to return an unblocked attacker to our hand and then put this card onto the battlefield tapped and attacking. Ninjutsu abilities we activate cost 1 generic mana less to activate. Other ninja and rogue creatures we control get +1/+1. This Shapeshifter deck is not a dedicated ninjutsu build, so Silver Fur Master's activation reduction does not sweeten the deal. We are evaluating a lord that gives 2 tribes, ninjas and rogues, +1/+1. Is Silver Fur Master an improvement over Zareth San the Trickster? Is Silver Fur Master an improvement over Yuriko the Tiger Shadow? No, and hell no. Pass. The following cards have abilities that trigger whenever a samurai or a warrior we control attacks alone. These cards will attempt to usurp Godo, Bandit Warlord, as the samurai tribe representative in the Changeling pool, and Najila, the Blade Blossom, as the warrior representative in the Changeling pool. Are any of these cards better than the current incumbents? Let's find out. Heiko Yamakaze the General is a 3/3 human samurai with trample for 3 and 1 red mana that allows us to cast a target artifact card from our graveyard. Even though Maskwood Nexus is one of the most important cards in the deck, its value does not inflate Heiku's worth over Godo or Najila. Pass. Ryu Storm's Edge is a 3/3 human samurai with first strike for 2 in Boros colors and creates an additional combat phase if it's the first combat phase of the turn. Najila and Godo do it better. Pass. Selfless Samurai is a 2/2 Fox Samurai for 1 and 1 white mana and allows the attacking creature to gain lifelink until end of turn, and also can be sacrificed to give another target creature we control indestructible until end of turn. This creature does not affect the board better than Godo or Najila. Pass. Asari Captain is a 4/3 human samurai with haste for 3 and Boros colors and gives the attacking creature +1/+0 until end of turn for each samurai or warrior we control. If only this ability weren't an exalted-like ability and triggered whenever a samurai or warrior we control attacks. Sadly, it does not. This single combat enhancement does not boost toughness, making it unlikely that our Changeling would survive combat. Godo and Najila optimize combat so much more. Pass. Norika Yamakaze, the Poet, is a 3/2 human samurai with vigilance for 2 and 1 white mana, and allows us to cast target enchantment card from our graveyard. Absent any additions from the Changeling pool, the current deck list has just 4 enchantments. This does not impact the game more than Goto or Najila. Roses are red, violets are blue. Who's not joining the Changeling pool? Well, that would be you. Pass. Ancestral Katana is an equipment for 1 and 1 white mana with an equip cost of 3 and allows us to pay 1 and attach it to attacking samurai or warrior, giving equipped creature +2/+1. This does not enhance combat better than Goto or Najila and is far from worthy of being the first equipment added to the 99 of this deck. Pass. Imperial Subduer is a 3/2 human samurai for 2 and 1 white mana, which lets us tap target creature we don't control. This is not impactful enough to unseat either of our aforementioned tribal incumbents. Pass. Iganjo Exemplar is a 2/1 human samurai for 1 and 1 white mana, and the attacking samurai or warrior we control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. There's not much to say about this creature, so let's move on. Pass. Aki Ronin is a 1/3 Goblin Samurai for 1 and 1 red mana, and allows us to discard a card and then draw a card. If this ability were for each samurai or warrior, a more in-depth discussion may ensue. It doesn't, so we won't. Pass. Peerless Samurai is a 2/3 human samurai with menace for 2 and 1 red mana, and reduces the next spell we cast this turn by 1. Another potential candidate for discussion if this ability were each samurai or warrior. It's not. We pass. Were there any other X spells from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty that would be a fit for the 99 of our Hinata Dawn-Crowned deck? One card comes to mind, and it's from the Upgrades Unleashed pre-constructed Commander deck. Smoke Spirit's Aid is a sorcery for X and 1 red mana. For each of up to X target creatures, we create a red aura enchantment token named Smoked Blessing attached to that creature. Those tokens have Enchant Creature, and when Enchanted Creature dies, it deals 1 damage to its controller, and we create a treasure token. With Hinata on our side, this spell costs us 1 red mana in order to attach a Smoked Blessing token aura to each of our opponent's creatures. We reap the benefit of peripheral direct damage when those creatures die, in addition to mana ramp in the form of treasure tokens. All of this for 1 red mana when our general is on the battlefield and under our control. This is a definite inclusion into this build. Smoke Spirit's Aid can easily replace Meteor Swarm. By slightly weakening an overall strength of the deck, dealing direct damage to creatures, we enhance the ability to deal direct damage to our opponents and strengthen our mana ramp. This is a great addition to Hinata decks. The Sisei Weatherlight Captain Enchantments Matter build received a number of upgrades and updates from a recent installment of the Up and Up series, the majority of which came from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. If you missed these updates, you can search in the description below for a link to Sisei's Up and Up episode, as well as the corresponding deck tech. There will be no further updates at this time. That concludes the breakdown of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty and its impact on the Burgeoning Commander Catalog. So now let's take a look at some other cards that seem poised to have an impact in our favorite format, EDH. The Invoke Cycle is a color-intensive set of spells that cost 1 and 4 mana of their respective color. From an EDH standpoint, with the number of 2 and 3 colored lands available, I think the ceiling for inclusion of these cards into decks is 3 colors max, and that might be stretching it a bit. I feel uneasy about including one of these cards in 4 or 5 color builds. Let's check them out. Invoke Justice returns any permanent card from our graveyard to the battlefield, and then we can spread 4+1/+1 counters among any number of creatures and or vehicles target player controls. The only other white sorcery in Magic's history that could do this is Profound Journey. Profound Journey costs 5 and 2 white mana to cast and has Rebound. So, in essence, it's 2 permanents for 7 mana. Invoke Justice is 1 permanent for 5 mana, in addition to a sprinkling of +1/+1 counters. Notice the text on Invoke Justice. The +1/+1 counters are distributed among any number of creatures and or vehicles target player controls, not any number of target creatures and or vehicles a player controls. This dances around creature protection like Shroud. Voltron players will love this. Invoke the Winds is the first blue sorcery in Magic's history which allows its caster to gain control of target artifact or creature permanently without any limitations, punishments, or restrictions. The artifact or creature also is untapped and the spell is not exiled, which allows for additional flashback or graveyard shenanigans. Any deck that can accommodate Invoke the Winds will love to do so. Invoke Despair forces target opponent to sacrifice a creature, enchantment, and planeswalker. If they can't sacrifice one, they lose 2 life and we draw a card. In any combination of effects, this is a 1-for-3 spell with the potential for some life lost by an opponent. Versatile removal spells are always coveted. Versatile removal spells that can skirt protection are coveted even more, especially when the spell itself could put cards into the caster's hand. Add Invoke Despair to the list of considerations for black removal spells. Invoke Calamity allows the caster to cast up to 2 instant and or sorcery spells with a combined mana value of 6 or less from their graveyard and or hand without paying their mana costs. Exile Invoke Calamity and any of the spells cast this way instead of putting them in the graveyard. This spell does indeed create a calamity, as it eschews potential timing restrictions and makes the graveyard an extension of our hand. Spell-slinging decks will love to include this beauty. Invoke the Ancients creates 8 total power and 10 total toughness on 2 bodies with some combination of 2 keyword abilities from Vigilance, Reach, or Trample for 5 total mana. Green Stompy decks will love this 2-for-1 spell. They did it. Wizards actually did it. They created a cycle of rare legendary lands with the channel mechanic, each of which allowing the player to discard the land, pay the channel cost, and at times for a reduced amount, for a valuable effect. Most importantly, for each of these lands, Wizards omitted the phrase, "This land comes into play tapped." By doing so, Wizards instantly created a cycle of lands that will become ubiquitous in EDH for the rest of time. These lands act as MDFCs and can count as a spell and a land in a deck, adding more versatility to an ever-growing arsenal of resourceful mana bases. At some point, basic lands are going to go the route of the dinosaurs if cycles of playable lands such as these continue to be created. It will be difficult to reconcile sound reasons for not including these lands over their basic land counterparts. These lands practically must be played in any decks that can support their colors. They come into play untapped. This is a cycle of instant spells, each costing X and 1 mana of their respective color. As an additional cost to cast this spell, we can exile any number of color-specific cards from our hand. This reduces the spell's cost by 2 for each card exiled this way. We are exchanging a very valuable resource in order to reduce the cost of these spells, so the effects of the spells better be worth it. Let's check them out. March of Otherworldly Light exiles target artifact, creature, or enchantment with mana value X or less. Is it worth it? As EDH players know, sometimes there is such a problematic or troublesome creature on the battlefield that they would do anything to get rid of it. What about the combo players assembling the artifacts and/or enchantments needed for a quick turn 2 or turn 3 win? In the early game, it may be worth exchanging cards in our hand for game longevity, and in the late game, we would have more mana available to cast this spell and preserve the cards in our hand. Exiling is so much more powerful than destroying. March of Otherworldly Light is worth it. March of Swirling Mist phases out up to X target creatures. This spell could also be valuable in the early game, particularly if a player is prepared to combo out with their commander on turn 2 or 3. Exchanging a card or two from our hand for the purposes of extending the game is acceptable. In the mid to late game, this could be used as a board wipe preserver or a potential win condition. March of Swirling Mist is worth it. March of Wretched Sorrow deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, and we gain X life. In the early game, this spell can be used to stop an opponent from comboing off with their commander. Again, exchanging cards in hand for game longevity is acceptable and could actually produce political allies at the table. In the mid to late game, this can act as possible creature or planeswalker removal. However, this spell is not as powerful as its predecessors. Better options may be available, particularly in black. March of Reckless Joy exiles the top X cards of our library. We may play up to 2 of those cards until the end of our next turn. This is the Hail Mary. This is pulling the goalie with 3 minutes left in the game down by 2. This is the half-court buzzer beater. Like most impulse-driven red spells, there's a level of risk and unpredictability attached to this card. Are there multiple cards in the library that can bring victory next turn? Does something need to be removed from the battlefield in order to avert imminent defeat? True red mages will probably embrace this card. For me, there's too much risk involved. I would pass, but perhaps you're braver than I. March of Burgeoning Life allows its caster to choose target creature with a mana value less than X and search their library for a creature card with the same name as that creature and put it onto the battlefield tapped. Outside of decks featuring Relentless Rats, Shadowborn Apostles, Rat Colony, or Persistent Petitioners, this card is an easy pass in EDH. For decks playing one of these creatures and has green in it, this is another Court of Calling and would serve the purpose of getting additional copies of these creatures onto the battlefield. Each Myojin is a legendary spirit for 5 and 3 mana of 1 color. Since they are legendary, these creatures could serve as commanders, but they are not optimal choices. In order to activate their abilities, an indestructible counter must be removed from the Myojin. Casting a Myojin from the command zone will not give it an indestructible counter. It must be cast from a player's hand. Yes, there are ways to put an indestructible counter onto a creature, and yes, there are ways to get creatures from the command zone and the battlefield into one's hand. But is it worth it? Wouldn't these creatures be better off in the 99? Let's find out. Myojin of Blooming Dawn is a 4/6. If we remove an indestructible counter from it, then we create a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token for each permanent we control. In a dedicated token build, this could be game-ending. If the Blooming Dawn is your commander, how often can you pull a command beacon? The odds are not great. Instead, jam it into the 99 of a token build and watch your opponent's chins hit the table when you remove that indestructible counter. Myojin of Cryptic Dreams is a 3/3. If we remove an indestructible counter from it, then we copy target permanent spell we control 3 times. Blue is the best at bouncing things, but do you really want to invest 16 mana or more into Cryptic Dreams by casting it from the command zone, bouncing it to your hand, and then recasting it? Let's not. Instead, slam this baby into the 99 of a partner build featuring Sakashima of 1,000 Faces, and watch your opponent's eyes glaze over as you copy a permanent spell 3 times. Myojin of Grim Betrayal is a 5/2. If we remove an indestructible counter from it, then we put onto the battlefield and under our control all creature cards in all graveyards that were put there from anywhere this turn. If Grim Betrayal is your commander, then good news. The number of cards that can get it from the command zone and into your hand doubles from 1 to 2. Command Beacon is the gold standard, of course, but Netherborn Altar could repeatedly put Grim Betrayal into your hand. At the cost of life, of course. This is black we're dealing with. Another thought. There are quite a number of tutors available in black, in addition to numerous ways to recur a creature from the graveyard to our hand. Myojin of Grim Betrayal could be a serious contender as a mono-black commander. It would be worth it to craft a mass milling sacrifice deck around Grim Betrayal's mass recursion ability. If this seems too adventurous, then perhaps jamming it into the 99 of a Dimir Mill build would be more preferred. Remove that indestructible counter and watch the sadness in your opponent's faces as they skim creature cards from their graveyards and place them under your control. Myojin of Roaring Blades is a 7/4. If we remove an indestructible counter from it, then we can have it deal 7 damage to up to 3 targets. How are you feeling about that command beacon? Are you hoping that Gamble will help out, and that you won't randomly discard command beacon after putting it into your hand, thereby nullifying the best shot to get Roaring Blades into your hand in a mono-red build? Save yourself the headache and smack this bad boy into the 99 of a straight-up burn deck featuring Torbrand, Thane of Redfell, and Fiery Emancipation. Remove that indestructible counter and watch your opponents mouth the math as their life totals drop big time. Myojin of Towering Might is an 8/8 and easily the biggest creature among the 5 Myojins. Of course it is, it's green. If we remove an indestructible counter from Towering Might, then we can distribute 8 +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures we control. They gain trample until end of turn. Okay, so do you have your command beacon? Check. Well, what a nice surprise we have here in green. Of course we do, it's green. Let's add Road of Return to the 99 of a deck featuring this Myojin as its commander. There are not a lot of ways to tutor for Road of Return, but we have a number of ways to recur this sorcery from our graveyard in order to use it multiple times. Of course we do, it's green. However, is it all worth it? At best, I can conjure a Voltron build with Towering Might, particularly because the +1/+1 counters can be placed on itself. The trample is temporary, but it's a green Voltron deck. We'll have the most powerful aura in Magic's history in the deck, Rancor. Of course we will, it's green. Save yourself the headaches and body slam Towering Might into the 99 of a Gruul modified deck. Remove that indestructible counter and watch your opponents become entranced and drool for Gruul, baby. Another cycle of shrines appear in this Kamigawa set, but this time in the form of legendary enchantment creatures. As an additional change, the triggered effects of each of these new shrines now require an activation cost of 1. There were only 11 shrines in Magic's history prior to this cycle, so now we have 17. Are any of these shrines worthy of inclusion into the 99 of a Shrine or Enchantments Matter build? Let's find out. Goshintai of Shared Purpose is 1/3 with Vigilance for 3 and 1 white mana. At the beginning of our end step, we may pay 1. If we do, then we create a 1/1 colorless spirit creature token for each shrine we control. This is a callback to Honden of Life's Web, one of the shrines from the original Kamigawa block. Even with the tax of 1 mana, this effect is still very desirable and is definitely worth including in a dedicated shrine build. If only those spirit tokens had flying. Goshintai of Lost Wisdom is 0/4 with flying for 1 and 1 blue mana. At the beginning of our end step, we may pay 1. If we do, then target player mills X cards, where X is the number of shrines we control. Milling is a new effect for shrines, and with only 17 shrines in existence, it may not be a reliable win condition. Its inclusion into shrine decks will most likely be because of what it is, and not what it does. Goshen Tie of Hidden Cruelty is 2/2 with Death Touch for 3 and 1 black mana. At the beginning of our end step, we may pay 1. If we do, then we may destroy target creature with toughness X or less, where X is equal to the number of shrines we control. Prior to this shrine's creation, Honden of Infinite Rage and Sanctum of Shattered Heights offered the only semblance of creature removal. But even these effects did not guarantee the removal of most creatures. Goshen Tai of Hidden Cruelty is a massive upgrade to Shrine creature removal and will be a valuable addition to the 99 of Shrine decks. Goshen Tai of Ancient Wars is 2/2 with First Strike for 2 and 1 red mana. At the beginning of our end step, we may pay 1. If we do, then this shrine deals X damage to target creature or planeswalker, where X is equal to the number of shrines we control. The evolution, or de-evolution, of red shrines went from dealing damage to any target, to paying 1 and discarding a land or a shrine to deal damage to a creature or a planeswalker, and now to paying 1 and dealing damage to a player or a planeswalker. We're not exactly getting stronger in red shrines here. At least this shrine allows for direct damage to players, and in a way could be considered a win condition. For all intents and purposes, this shrine should be included in the 99 of shrine builds. Goshintai of Boundless Vigor is 1/1 with Trample for 1 and 1 green mana. At the beginning of our end step, we may pay 1. If we do, then we put a +1/+1 counter on target shrine for each shrine we control. Since there are only a total of 6 shrine creatures, Boundless Vigor will most likely be the recipient of these +1/+1 counters, which is okay. It has Trample and could do some damage along the way. More importantly, however, this is a shrine, and a shrine deck needs them shrines. None of the preceding creature shrines should be considered as a potential commander for any mages hoping to craft a shrine deck. There just aren't enough shrines to try to craft a color-specific shrine deck. However, did the last of the new shrine offerings from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty provide players with the best possible shrine commander? Let's find out. Goshen Tai of Life's Origin is a 3/4 legendary enchantment shrine creature for 3 and 1 green mana. We can pay Wooburg and tap it to return target enchantment card from our graveyard to the battlefield. Whenever Goshen Tai of Life's Origin or another non-token shrine enters the battlefield under our control, we create a 1/1 colorless shrine enchantment creature token. This commander could support a 5-color shrine deck, but should it? Let's take a deeper dive and compare Life's Origin to another worthy shrine commander. We need enchantments in the graveyard in order to activate Life's Origin's ability. This is not impossible, particularly because we have all 5 colors at our disposal. However, this effect will always be limited to what's in our graveyard. Similar to Life's Origin, Sisay Weatherlight Captain also has a Wooburg activation cost. However, it's much more versatile. Unlike Life's Origin, we do not have to tap Sisay to activate her ability, meaning that we can activate it multiple times on the same turn without the need for peripheral untap effects. Sisay tutors from our library any legendary permanent whose converted mana cost is less than her power and puts it right into play. Sisay puts shrines onto the battlefield much more reliably than Life's Origin, and from a greater pool of options. Life's Origin's triggered ability is very powerful and can be considered a win condition. Each shrine that comes into play creates a shrine enchantment creature token. Since the theme of a shrine deck is to get shrines onto the battlefield, we have to hand the commander reins over to Sisay because she does it better than Life's Origin. Life's Origin, however, absolutely must be included in the 99 of any shrine deck, but I do not prefer it as the commander. Sisay is better. Secluded Courtyard is an improvement over Unclaimed Territory. All tribal decks that run Unclaimed Territory should also include Secluded Courtyard. For all intents and purposes, Secluded Courtyard is better than Unclaimed Territory and could replace it outright. However, if able, replace a basic land instead. Secluded Courtyard will be added to Edgar Markov and will Helt the Rock Cleaver. Mirror Box is another recent offering that negates the legend rule to permanents we control. Sakashima of 1,000 Faces approves. Mirror Box gives each legendary creature we control +1/+1. Legends Matter decks will enjoy this Anthem effect. Lastly, Mirror Box gives each non-token creature we control +1/+1 for each other creature we control with the same name as that creature. Decks built around Relentless Rats, Shadowborn Apostles, Rat Colony, and Persistent Petitioners will welcome this coat of arms-like win condition with arms wide open. Farewell will be one of the biggest hits of this set. As a general rule, exiling is better than destroying, and Farewell gives the option of exiling all artifacts, creatures, enchantments, and/or graveyards. This is merciless eviction without modal restrictions, black mana, and a swap of planeswalkers for graveyards. I sense that this card will be one of those go-to removal spells that any deck playing white will want to include in the 99. The problem will be having enough copies of them to go around. Lion Sash is a better version of Scavenging Ooze. It can be a 1/1 creature or reconfigured onto another creature as an equipment for 2 mana. We can pay 1 white mana and exile a card from a graveyard, and if it's a permanent card, we put a +1/+1 counter on Lion Sash. The reconfigured creature gets +1/+1 for each +1/+1 counter on Lion Sash. The utility and versatility of this card is mind-boggling. I sense that this will be one of the sleeper hits of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and it can be played in any deck with white because of its functionality. Be careful with Boseiju Reaches Skyward. This saga puts 2 forest cards into our hand for 3 and 1 green mana with its first lore counter. However, Skyshroud Claim puts 2 forest cards onto the battlefield for the same mana value. This saga's second lore counter puts up to 1 target land from our graveyard onto the battlefield, which is decent if there's a land in the graveyard. The third lore counter triggers an exile effect, resulting in Branch of Boseiju, an evasionless 0/0 plant creature that gets +1/+1 for each land we control. It may seem tempting to favor this spell over the aforementioned Skyshroud Claim or Migration Path. Don't make that mistake. Lands into play are better than lands into our hand. Rabbit Battery may become a sleeper hit from this set. It's not a traditional colorless equipment, as a deck must have red in it for it to be included. This card can come into play as a hasty 1/1 at first, and then become reconfigured onto a creature to give that creature haste. Never sleep on the benefit of haste. Roadside Reliquary is a powerful addition to any deck sporting a sizable amount of artifacts and enchantments. Yes, we lose the land to sacrifice, but could end up drawing 2 cards at instant speed. Swift Reconfiguration is going to join the ranks of Swords to Plowshares and Path to Exile as go-to white removal spells, but beyond its surface, this spell is even more than that. It could be cast to preserve our own creature from a creature board wipe or mass creature exiling effect. This card will become a white staple in EDH. Access Denied is another in a long list of cleverly named counterspells, like Saw It Coming and Cancel. This card easily can be played alongside Spell Swindle in blue decks that care about artifacts. Like those even exist, right? Unquenchable Fury is an aura that does not boost the enchanted creature's power or toughness. It does not give it haste or evasion or any kind of protection. It adds an unpredictable direct damage effect that triggers whenever the enchanted creature attacks. So why are we talking about this card? It's worth mentioning because Unquenchable Fury has a Rancor-like ability of surviving 2-for-1s, a historical detriment rightfully applied to all auras. The mana value is triple the cost of Rancor, but its staying power and direct damage effect is enticing enough to motivate inclusions into the 99 of red decks. Take note, the enchanted creature does not have to deal any combat damage in order to trigger Unquenchable Fury's direct damage. We can slap this aura onto a 1/1 token, point it into the direction of the opponent with the greatest number of cards in their hands, and we watch the token die, get back the aura, and watch our opponent's life total tick southward. Watch out for this card. At instant speed, Release to Memory combines singular graveyard hate with the potential for mass token creation. Under the right circumstances, this card could have a devastating swing effect during a game, particularly if it's cast at the end of our last opponent's turn or against someone who has been treating their graveyard like a full extension of their hand. EDH players don't do that, right? High-Speed Hoverbike can give any deck in any combination of colors a one-time instant speed tap effect, and afterwards a small, annoying, and evasive creature or a chump blocker. Holding back an instant speed tap effect like High-Speed Hoverbike could be a sneaky good play. Imperial Oath creates a 6 power and 6 toughness stretched across 3 bodies for 6 mana. The additional scry effects makes this card playable in token decks, particularly in the late game when top decking may be on full display. Reckoner's Bargain may end up being the most popular common of the set. We have the usual necessary sacrifice of a creature or an artifact in order to cast this instant speed cantrip spell. However, we don't lose any life, which generally is a staple in black draw spells, usually to the tune of 1 mana per 1 life lost per 1 card drawn. Not here. Here we gain life equal to the sacrifice permanent's mana value. 1 mana per 1 card drawn and life gain to boot. Staple. You Are Already Dead changes the role of the chump blocker forever. Lowly 1/1 creatures can now lead to the downfall of creatures so much more powerful, and the card replaces itself. This is Fatal Blow with card draw. Black removal spells just got another beauty. Cameo Safekeeping is doing something that has never been seen in green, like the color needed any more benchmarks like this. For the first time in Magic's history, any one permanent gains hexproof and indestructible until the end of turn for 1 green mana. 1 green mana to protect the biggest and stompiest creature from meeting its doom, or to preserve that mana reflection or great henge. Yay, green! Hidetsugu Devouring Chaos was mentioned earlier in this review. It wasn't seen as a great fit for our Kaalia of the Vast deck, but it seems like an awesome general around which a player could build a prototypical Rakdos deck. As sacrificing and recursion are historical themes of the Rakdos color pairing, Hidetsugu can be thrust into the spotlight helming a deck that throws around direct damage like nobody's business. For added fun, include Prosper Tomebound in the 99 and watch the Exile shenanigans ensue. With a plethora of ways to manage the top of our library while also filling the 99 with cards like Vile Smasher the Fierce, Dictate of the Twin Gods, Gratuitous Violence, Furnace of Wrath, and Fiery Emancipation, we will make the game quick and painful for our opponents. Another set, another Mardu Commander. This time it's Isshin, 2 heavens as 1. Whether it's Edgar Markov, Kali of the Vast, or Queen Marchesa, Mardu builds want to attack, and a deck built around Isshin should be no different. In order to get the very best of Isshin's attack trigger, we should include cards like Fervent Charge, Brutal Horde Chief, Itali Primal Storm, Campaign of Vengeance, Hellrider, and Mardu Ascendancy. These attack triggers are not just dependent on our creatures. Let's make sure that our opponents feel Isshin's love by including cards like Revenge of Ravens, Kazul, Tyrant of the Cliffs, Cunning Rhetoric, and Hissing Miasma. Lightpaw's Emperor's Voice is begging for an Aura Voltron build, and that's exactly how I would construct it. Classic auras like Ethereal Armor, Daybreak Coronet, All That Glitters, Hyena Umbra, Sage's Reverie, and Spirit Mantle would lead the way. However, if we're planning to jam mad auras into the 99, then we should include some payoffs like Hallowed Haunting, Sigarda's Aid, Sigil of the Empty Throne, and Archon of Sun's Grace. Since we're crafting an aura-dependent build, we run the risk of getting one for many, so we should include spells like Brilliant Restoration, Mantle of the Ancients, Retether, Triumphant Reckoning, and Open the Vaults. Including these recursion spells ensures that our auras can come back from the graveyard. Hinata Dawncrown is the new commander for whom I am most excited, as evidenced by its inclusion into the Burgeoning Commander Catalog ahead of this set review. A cross between Battlefield Thaumaturge and Grand Arbiter Augustin IV, Hinata provides a powerful engine of value and resource disparity, and its presence on the battlefield will quickly overwhelm opponents. With this Jeskai General under our control, we can destroy all of our opponent's artifacts and enchantments for 2 white mana by casting Heliod's Intervention. We can exile all of our opponent's creatures for 2 blue mana by casting Curse of the Swine, leaving behind a sounder of creature tokens. We can untap all of our lands and mana rocks for 2 blue mana by casting Reality Spasm. We can cast Cyclonic Rift for just 3 blue mana by casting Distorting Wake instead. Due to the ability to completely turn the tables on resource management, Hinata Dawncrown, in my opinion, is the most powerful new commander option from Kamigawa Neon Dynasty, and it's not even close. As we saved the best for last, Hinata will conclude our BCC and EDH review of Kamigawa Neon Dynasty. This set was stuffed with commander goodies, playable cycles of cards, and awesome new generals. Tell me in the comment section below which cards excite you the most. Also, share your thoughts about possible swaps to be made to the decks residing in the BCC. I appreciate all of your feedback as we cultivate the Burgeoning Commander Catalog through the suggestions made by the MTG BC. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.